In November 1943 the atoll of Makin, centered on the island of Butaritari in the northern Gilberts, was under Japanese occupation. The garrison consisted of elements of the Special Naval Landing Forces and support personnel assigned to coastal defense, aviation facilities, and communications. Defensive preparations included cleared fields of fire along the lagoon shore, log and coral revetments, anti-boat obstacles, pillboxes, trench systems, and dispersed strongpoints oriented toward likely landing areas. Installations on the island included a seaplane base, radio stations, fuel storage, and barracks distributed along the narrow landmass. The terrain consisted of coconut groves, scrub vegetation, shallow lagoons, tidal flats, and sandy beaches, with limited elevation and extensive mangrove growth in some sectors. Weather conditions in mid-November were marked by intermittent rain squalls, variable winds, and heavy surf on the ocean side, while lagoon waters remained comparatively calm. United States forces assigned to operations in the northern Gilberts were organized under amphibious task groups operating as part of a larger Central Pacific offensive. The mission assigned to the Makin landing force was the seizure and occupation of Butaritari and adjacent islands, destruction of enemy forces and installations, and establishment of air and naval facilities. Planning documents specified coordinated landings on selected beaches, followed by rapid inland movement to neutralize defensive positions and secure key terrain. Naval gunfire, aerial bombardment, and carrier-based air support were allocated to suppress enemy resistance prior to and during the landings. In parallel with preparations for Makin, separate assault forces were assigned to conduct landings on other islands within the Gilbert archipelago. These operations were scheduled to occur within the same general timeframe, with coordination of naval movements, air cover, and logistics. Each landing force was tasked with securing its designated objective, establishing perimeter defenses, and clearing remaining enemy resistance. The operations were conducted under radio silence during approach phases, with final orders disseminated aboard transports and assault vessels. On November 20, 1943 naval forces approached the Gilberts under cover of darkness. Transport groups carrying assault troops maneuvered into assigned positions offshore. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers took up fire support stations according to prearranged plans. Carrier task groups maintained flight operations to provide air cover and strike enemy positions. Minesweeping units operated in advance of the transports to clear approach lanes. Reconnaissance aircraft conducted final observation flights to verify beach conditions and enemy activity. Prior to dawn, naval gunfire commenced against known and suspected defensive positions on Butaritari. Bombardment was directed against coastal batteries, pillboxes, and installations identified through aerial photography and intelligence reports. Smoke and dust rose from impacted areas, and fires were observed in several locations. Carrier aircraft conducted strafing and bombing runs along the length of the island, concentrating on the lagoon shore where landings were planned. Anti-aircraft fire from the island was observed but limited in volume. Landing forces for Makin were organized into assault waves embarked in landing craft. Units were briefed on their objectives, routes of advance, and procedures for consolidation ashore. Equipment included rifles, automatic weapons, mortars, demolition charges, radios, and engineering tools. Amphibious tractors and boats were loaded according to wave assignments. Medical personnel, engineers, and communications teams were integrated into the initial echelons. At first light, landing craft were lowered from transports and moved toward assembly areas. Sea conditions within the lagoon allowed relatively smooth movement, though navigation through reef passages required careful handling. Control vessels directed the waves toward designated beaches. As the first assault elements approached shore, naval gunfire shifted inland according to schedule. Aircraft continued to operate overhead, maintaining patrols and conducting strikes as requested by shore fire control parties. Initial landings on Butaritari encountered limited immediate opposition. Assault troops disembarked and moved inland from the beaches, establishing footholds and organizing for further advance. Resistance was encountered in the form of small arms fire from concealed positions within coconut groves and from bunkers constructed of logs and earth. Units responded with fire and maneuver, employing grenades, automatic weapons, and demolitions to neutralize resistance. Engineers worked to clear obstacles and widen beach exits. Progress inland was slowed by dense vegetation, waterlogged ground, and the narrow configuration of the island. Units advanced along both the lagoon shore and the ocean side, coordinating movements to avoid gaps. Communications were maintained through field radios and runners. Medical aid stations were established near the beaches, and casualties were evacuated by stretcher and landing craft as conditions allowed. As the day progressed, additional waves landed with supplies, heavy weapons, and supporting elements. Mortar sections were brought ashore and emplaced to provide indirect fire against identified enemy positions. Anti-tank guns and artillery pieces were landed and moved into firing positions to cover approaches and support infantry advances. Naval gunfire liaison teams adjusted fire based on observations from forward positions. Enemy resistance consisted of scattered groups operating from prepared positions and attempting infiltration through vegetation. Some defenders engaged in close-range combat, while others withdrew to secondary positions. U.S. units conducted systematic clearing operations, moving from position to position. Demolition charges and flamethrowers were employed against fortified bunkers. Captured documents and equipment were collected for intelligence purposes. Throughout the day, aircraft continued to provide support, attacking targets as designated by ground observers. Occasional enemy aircraft activity was reported in the area, but air superiority was maintained. Anti-aircraft units aboard ships and ashore remained on alert. Naval patrols operated around the atoll to prevent interference by enemy surface forces. By nightfall on November 20, U.S. forces had secured significant portions of Butaritari, including key installations near the seaplane base. Defensive perimeters were established, and units prepared for possible counterattacks. Listening posts and patrols were placed forward. Supplies were distributed, and wounded personnel received treatment. Engineers began work on improving beach facilities and constructing temporary roads. During the night, sporadic firing occurred as patrols encountered isolated enemy personnel. No organized counterattack developed. Units maintained alert status, rotating watch assignments. Naval vessels continued to provide illumination and standby fire support as requested. Weather conditions remained variable, with intermittent rain affecting visibility and movement. On November 21, operations resumed with continued clearing of remaining enemy positions. Units advanced along assigned sectors, coordinating movements to close gaps. Resistance was encountered primarily in the form of small groups occupying concealed positions. These were engaged and eliminated through coordinated infantry action. Engineering teams dismantled obstacles and began work on airfield and base facilities as areas were secured. Throughout the day, additional supplies and personnel were landed. Communications installations were established to support coordination with naval and air units. Fuel and ammunition dumps were organized inland from the beaches. Medical evacuation continued as needed. Captured enemy equipment and documents were collected and catalogued. By the afternoon of November 21, organized resistance on Butaritari had been largely neutralized. Units conducted final sweeps of assigned areas to locate remaining enemy personnel and weapons. Patrols extended to adjacent islands within the atoll to ensure security. Defensive positions were improved, and plans were implemented for continued occupation and development of the island. Concurrent with the Makin operation, other assault forces were engaged in landings elsewhere in the Gilbert Islands. These operations followed similar patterns of naval bombardment, amphibious assault, inland advance, and consolidation. Assault troops landed under covering fire, secured beachheads, and moved to clear enemy defenses. Engineers and support units followed to establish facilities and defenses. Naval and air support remained coordinated across the archipelago to respond to emerging requirements. In each landing area, units encountered terrain characterized by coral formations, narrow land areas, and dense vegetation. Defensive works constructed by Japanese forces varied in complexity but generally included bunkers, trenches, and obstacles oriented toward likely landing sites. Clearing operations required close coordination among infantry, engineers, and supporting arms. Casualty evacuation and resupply were conducted under ongoing operational conditions. As operations progressed, emphasis shifted toward securing perimeters, establishing communications, and preparing for potential enemy action. Patrols were conducted to detect remaining resistance. Engineering activities expanded to include construction of airstrips, roads, and defensive positions. Naval units adjusted dispositions to support ongoing operations and provide protection against possible enemy naval or air interference. Throughout the period, command elements maintained coordination through established channels. Situation reports were transmitted regularly, detailing progress, enemy activity, and logistical status. Adjustments to plans were made based on observed conditions and operational requirements. Weather continued to influence operations, affecting flight schedules and landing conditions. By the conclusion of initial assault phases in the Gilberts, U.S. forces held designated objectives and continued operations to secure and develop the islands. On Makin, occupation forces maintained security and conducted routine patrols. Construction and improvement of facilities proceeded as materials and personnel became available. Naval and air units continued to operate in support of island garrisons and ongoing operations within the Central Pacific. All actions during this period were conducted according to orders in effect at the time, based on available intelligence, operational plans, and situational reports. The sequence of events reflected the conditions encountered during the landings, advances, and consolidation phases, as recorded by participating units and command elements during November 1943. During the days following the initial landings in November 1943, operations on Butaritari continued under established orders. Units assigned to occupation and security duties reorganized positions along the length of the island. Defensive sectors were delineated, and responsibility for each sector was assigned to specific units. Command posts were established in areas providing cover and access to communications. Field telephones and radio links connected infantry units with supporting artillery, naval fire control parties, and higher headquarters. Engineering units expanded their activities beyond immediate combat support. Beach exits were improved to allow the movement of vehicles and supplies. Coconut logs, coral fill, and pierced steel planking were used to stabilize soft ground. Work parties cleared vegetation to improve fields of fire and reduce concealment. Existing enemy structures were inspected, cleared, and repurposed where suitable. Fuel storage areas were secured and guarded. Water points were identified and tested for use. Medical detachments established aid stations at designated locations. Wounded personnel remaining from the assault phase were treated and evacuated as transport became available. Sanitation measures were implemented to reduce the risk of disease, including waste disposal and water purification. Medical officers monitored conditions related to heat, humidity, and insect exposure. Preventive measures were issued according to standing procedures. Patrols continued to operate along both lagoon and ocean shores. These patrols were tasked with locating isolated enemy personnel, observing approaches, and maintaining contact between adjacent units. Reports from patrols were transmitted to sector headquarters and logged. Occasional encounters resulted in brief engagements, usually at close range, involving small arms and grenades. Captured weapons and documents were forwarded to intelligence sections. Naval vessels remained stationed offshore in support roles. Destroyers and smaller craft conducted anti-submarine patrols around the atoll. Supply ships moved into designated anchorage areas under protection. Landing craft shuttled supplies from transports to shore. Beachmasters coordinated unloading operations, assigning priorities based on operational needs. Ammunition, rations, construction materials, and medical supplies were brought ashore and distributed. Air operations continued in support of ground forces. Aircraft conducted reconnaissance flights over surrounding waters and islands. Liaison aircraft maintained contact with ground units, relaying information and requests. Weather conditions influenced flight schedules, with squalls and low cloud cover requiring adjustments. Airstrips under development were surveyed and marked for future use. Parallel operations elsewhere in the Gilbert Islands proceeded on similar timelines. Assault forces on neighboring islands reported ongoing resistance in some sectors and consolidation in others. Naval gunfire and air support were shifted as required between objectives. Communications traffic reflected the coordination required to manage multiple landing areas within the same operational theater. On Butaritari, command elements reviewed intelligence collected during the initial phases. Enemy dispositions were assessed based on captured materials and interrogation of prisoners. Defensive plans were adjusted accordingly. Units were repositioned to cover likely avenues of approach. Observation posts were established at key points along the coastline and inland routes. As construction activities increased, engineering units began work on extending and improving existing airfield facilities. Clearing operations removed debris and vegetation from designated areas. Grading and leveling were conducted using available equipment and manual labor. Fuel and maintenance areas were designated, and security measures were implemented. Progress was reported daily to higher headquarters. Logistical operations required continuous coordination. Supply dumps were organized by type and guarded. Distribution schedules were established to ensure units received required materials. Ration distribution followed standard procedures, with adjustments made for available stocks. Water distribution was managed through centralized points. Maintenance personnel inspected weapons and vehicles, conducting repairs as needed. Throughout this period, enemy activity diminished but did not cease entirely. Isolated snipers and small groups were occasionally encountered. These incidents were addressed through patrol action and localized sweeps. Units maintained alert status, particularly during hours of darkness. Flares and illumination rounds were available for use in response to suspected movement. Naval commanders maintained readiness to provide fire support if required. Fire control plans were updated based on ground unit reports. Prearranged targets were designated around the island perimeter. Communication channels between shore parties and ships were tested regularly to ensure reliability. In the broader context of the Gilbert Islands operations, the parallel landings required ongoing allocation of resources. Amphibious shipping was scheduled to move between objectives, delivering reinforcements and supplies. Casualty evacuation routes were coordinated to move wounded personnel to rear medical facilities. Commanders exchanged situation reports through established channels. Weather continued to influence operations across the archipelago. Sea conditions affected landing craft operations, particularly on ocean-facing shores. Rainfall impacted ground movement and construction efforts. Commanders adjusted work schedules and patrol patterns in response to conditions. As days progressed, emphasis on Butaritari shifted toward sustained occupation and preparation for potential further operations. Defensive positions were strengthened using sandbags, logs, and earthworks. Fields of fire were cleared and marked. Units conducted training and rehearsals according to standing orders. Equipment inventories were updated and deficiencies reported. Communication facilities were expanded to support long-term operations. Antennas were erected, and power sources were established. Signal units maintained circuits linking island headquarters with naval and air commands. Message traffic included operational updates, logistical requests, and intelligence summaries. Civilian considerations were minimal, as the island population had been evacuated or displaced prior to operations. Areas formerly used for civilian purposes were inspected for hazards and cleared. Any remaining structures were catalogued and assessed for use or demolition. Intelligence sections continued analysis of enemy activity in the region. Reports from reconnaissance aircraft and naval patrols were compiled. Information was disseminated to units as required. Maps were updated to reflect current control and known features. In other sectors of the Gilbert Islands, assault forces encountered varying levels of resistance. Some islands required prolonged clearing operations due to terrain and defensive arrangements. Engineers faced similar challenges related to coral ground and limited resources. Naval and air support remained integral to maintaining momentum and security. On Butaritari, routine operations settled into established patterns. Patrols followed scheduled routes. Construction proceeded according to plans. Supply operations maintained steady flow. Units rotated duties to manage fatigue. Commanders conducted inspections to ensure readiness and adherence to procedures. Occasional alerts were issued in response to reports of possible enemy activity in surrounding waters or airspace. These alerts resulted in temporary increases in defensive readiness. No major engagements occurred during these periods, but procedures were exercised as planned. As November progressed, coordination between island garrisons and higher command continued. Orders were received regarding force disposition, priorities for construction, and allocation of resources. These orders were disseminated through the chain of command and implemented accordingly. The parallel operations within the archipelago required ongoing situational awareness. Commanders monitored developments on neighboring islands, adjusting plans for mutual support if required. Naval units maintained flexibility to respond to emerging needs. On Butaritari, the accumulation of supplies and completion of initial construction tasks marked a transition in daily activities. Units prepared for extended presence, maintaining security while supporting engineering efforts. Training schedules incorporated local conditions and operational requirements. Throughout this phase, records were maintained documenting actions, expenditures, and observations. These records included patrol reports, construction logs, medical statistics, and intelligence summaries. Reports were transmitted to higher headquarters at regular intervals. By the end of this period, operations on Butaritari had stabilized under established control measures. Defensive arrangements were in place, support facilities were under development, and routine operations continued. Parallel operations elsewhere in the Gilbert Islands followed similar trajectories, with each island garrison adapting to local conditions while maintaining coordination within the overall operational framework. In the latter part of November 1943, activity on Butaritari proceeded under standing operational directives. Units assigned to the island continued systematic security operations while engineering and logistical efforts expanded. Command authority remained centralized under the designated landing force headquarters, which maintained liaison with naval task group commanders and air elements operating in the region. Daily operational summaries were compiled based on reports from subordinate units and transmitted through established channels. Infantry units maintained sector responsibility along the length of the island. Defensive positions were adjusted to reflect observed terrain features and potential landing points along both lagoon and ocean shores. Listening posts and observation points were repositioned as vegetation was cleared and fields of fire improved. Night security procedures were standardized, with scheduled patrols, overlapping watch assignments, and predetermined response measures for alerts. Engineering detachments continued to address mobility and infrastructure requirements. Roadways connecting key installations were widened and reinforced using coral fill and locally sourced materials. Temporary bridges were constructed over low-lying areas subject to tidal flooding. Drainage channels were cut to reduce standing water. Work schedules were organized to balance labor demands with security requirements, and guards were assigned to construction sites. Airfield development remained a priority. Survey teams finalized runway alignments based on soil conditions and prevailing winds. Clearing crews removed remaining obstacles, including tree stumps and debris from earlier bombardment. Grading operations progressed incrementally, constrained by available equipment and weather. Fuel storage points were established at dispersed locations to reduce congestion and improve safety. Security patrols were assigned to airfield perimeters. Supply operations followed established routines. Landing craft continued to deliver cargo from offshore vessels. Beachmasters coordinated unloading priorities, emphasizing engineering materials, fuel, and rations. Warehouses and open storage areas were organized inland, with camouflage measures applied where feasible. Inventory records were maintained, and discrepancies were reported through logistical channels. Medical operations remained active. Aid stations treated routine injuries and illnesses associated with prolonged field conditions. Preventive medicine teams conducted inspections of living areas and work sites. Insect control measures were implemented using available materials. Water sources were monitored regularly, and purification procedures were enforced. Evacuation of patients requiring advanced care was coordinated with naval transport. Patrol activity extended to adjacent islets within the atoll. Small detachments embarked in landing craft to conduct reconnaissance and security sweeps. These patrols reported minimal contact, though occasional evidence of prior enemy presence was documented. Areas were marked as cleared upon completion of patrols, and navigation hazards were recorded. Intelligence sections continued to compile information from multiple sources. Captured documents were translated and analyzed. Interrogations of prisoners provided details regarding unit composition, supply arrangements, and defensive preparations. Reconnaissance reports from aircraft and naval patrols were integrated into situation maps. Intelligence summaries were disseminated to commanders at appropriate levels. Naval forces supporting the island maintained patrol patterns around the atoll. Anti-submarine operations continued, with sonar sweeps and depth charge readiness maintained. Minesweeping units verified cleared channels and updated navigation markers. Supply ships rotated through anchorage areas according to schedule, minimizing congestion. Air activity over the region remained steady. Patrol aircraft conducted searches for enemy surface or air units. Weather reconnaissance flights reported conditions affecting operations. Liaison flights maintained contact with ground headquarters, delivering messages and small cargo. Air defense units ashore maintained readiness, conducting drills and equipment checks. Parallel operations on other Gilbert Islands continued to require coordination. Reports from those areas indicated ongoing clearing operations, construction efforts, and security measures similar to those on Butaritari. Resource allocation was adjusted based on reported needs. Amphibious shipping schedules reflected the requirement to support multiple garrisons simultaneously. On Butaritari, units conducted periodic training to maintain proficiency. Exercises included defensive drills, communications tests, and coordination with supporting arms. These activities were scheduled to avoid interference with construction and patrol duties. After-action reports documented performance and identified areas requiring attention. Weather conditions continued to affect daily activities. Rainfall impacted ground conditions, slowing vehicle movement and construction. Work plans were adjusted accordingly. Personnel protective measures were emphasized to mitigate exposure. Equipment maintenance schedules accounted for corrosion and were associated with the environment. Administrative functions were established to support sustained operations. Personnel records were updated, and replacements were integrated into units as they arrived. Mail distribution was organized when transport allowed. Pay and supply accounting followed standard procedures. Chaplain services were conducted according to availability and operational constraints. Enemy activity remained limited to isolated incidents. Occasional reports of movement or sounds prompted local alerts and patrol responses. These incidents were investigated and logged. No coordinated enemy action developed during this period. Units maintained readiness in accordance with standing orders. Communications infrastructure expanded incrementally. Additional radio equipment was installed to improve redundancy. Power generation units were maintained and fuel supplies monitored. Signal personnel conducted regular checks to ensure circuit reliability. Message traffic volume reflected routine operational and logistical coordination. As November progressed, emphasis on Butaritari increasingly reflected stabilization rather than active combat. Defensive works were refined, and construction projects advanced. Units adjusted to established routines while maintaining alertness. Coordination with naval and air elements continued through scheduled briefings and reports. In the broader archipelago, commanders monitored developments and adjusted plans as necessary. The presence of multiple secured islands required ongoing coordination of supply lines and defensive measures. Naval patrols remained distributed to cover approaches. Air coverage was maintained to deter or detect enemy movement. On Butaritari, inspections by senior officers were conducted to assess readiness and progress. Findings were reported through command channels, and corrective actions were implemented where directed. These inspections covered defensive positions, living conditions, supply management, and training status. The accumulation of materials and completion of initial infrastructure enabled expanded operations. Storage capacity increased, and distribution efficiency improved. Units reported improved mobility along internal routes. Airfield progress allowed planning for future operational use, subject to completion and testing. Throughout this phase, documentation continued to be generated at all levels. Daily logs, patrol reports, engineering records, and medical statistics were maintained. These records reflected ongoing activities and conditions as they occurred. Transmission of reports followed established schedules. By the end of this period, Butaritari functioned as an organized garrison area under continuous occupation. Security measures were in place, support facilities were under development, and routine operations continued. Parallel operations across the Gilbert Islands followed comparable patterns, with each garrison adapting procedures to local conditions while maintaining coordination within the overall operational structure. As November 1943 continued, operations on Butaritari remained governed by active occupation directives. The island was administered as a secured forward area, with command responsibility exercised through established headquarters elements. Daily schedules reflected the balance between security, construction, logistics, and administrative requirements. Orders issued during this period emphasized readiness, perimeter control, and completion of assigned engineering tasks. Infantry units continued to man defensive positions along designated sectors. Trenches, foxholes, and firing positions were improved using coral fill, sandbags, and available timber. Camouflage measures were applied to reduce visibility from air and sea. Units adjusted positions based on continued observation of terrain and tidal conditions. Fire plans were updated to reflect cleared fields of fire and improved visibility. Night operations followed standardized procedures. Sectors maintained listening posts forward of main lines. Patrols operated on rotating schedules, covering shoreline approaches and interior routes. Reports from these patrols were consolidated at sector headquarters and forwarded to Island Command. Illumination devices and signal flares were maintained in readiness. No sustained enemy activity was detected during this period, though alerts continued to be treated according to standing instructions. Engineering units expanded construction efforts beyond immediate military needs. Road networks connecting command posts, supply dumps, airfield areas, and defensive sectors were extended and reinforced. Coral was quarried locally and transported by vehicle and manual labor. Drainage improvements continued in low-lying areas prone to flooding. Work crews operated in shifts to maximize output while maintaining security coverage. Airfield construction advanced incrementally. Grading operations progressed along the designated runway alignment. Engineers addressed soft ground conditions through layered fill and compaction. Temporary markings were placed to indicate cleared sections. Ancillary facilities, including revetments, dispersal areas, and access roads, were surveyed and partially constructed. Coordination with air units ensured that development met operational requirements. Logistical activities remained continuous. Supply ships delivered additional cargo, including construction equipment, fuel, and replacement parts. Beach unloading operations followed established routines, with priorities set by command directives. Storage areas were reorganized as capacity increased. Ammunition stocks were inventoried and redistributed as required. Fuel handling procedures were enforced to reduce risk. Medical services adapted to sustained field conditions. Aid stations treated ongoing cases of illness and injury. Preventive medicine measures were reinforced, including inspections of food handling areas and living quarters. Sanitation facilities were expanded and maintained. Medical reports were compiled and transmitted according to schedule. Coordination with naval medical facilities continued for evacuation of serious cases. Signal units expanded communications capacity. Additional antennas were erected to improve range and reliability. Redundant circuits were established between key command elements. Maintenance teams conducted routine checks and repairs. Message traffic included operational updates, logistical requests, and intelligence reports. Communications discipline was enforced to maintain clarity and security. Intelligence sections maintained surveillance of surrounding waters and islands through coordination with naval and air reconnaissance. Reports indicated no significant enemy movement in the immediate vicinity. Analysis of captured materials continued, though new sources were limited. Intelligence summaries reflected the reduced level of enemy activity and were distributed accordingly. Naval forces supporting the island maintained assigned patrol areas. Destroyers and smaller craft conducted regular sweeps. Anchored vessels adjusted positions based on weather and operational needs. Naval gunfire support plans remained in effect, with prearranged targets maintained. Communication between shore fire control parties and ships was tested periodically. Air operations continued to provide coverage. Patrol aircraft flew scheduled missions. Weather reports influenced flight planning. Liaison aircraft supported coordination between island command and higher headquarters. Air defense units ashore maintained equipment readiness and conducted periodic drills. Parallel garrison operations across the Gilbert Islands followed similar patterns. Reports from other islands described ongoing construction, security patrols, and logistical buildup. Coordination among island commands occurred through naval and air channels. Resource distribution was adjusted based on reported progress and requirements. On Butaritari, administrative functions expanded to support the growing garrison. Personnel processing continued as reinforcements arrived. Unit rosters were updated. Supply accounting and maintenance records were maintained. Mail handling resumed on a limited basis as transport permitted. Religious services and welfare activities were conducted within operational constraints. Training activities were conducted to maintain readiness. Units practiced defensive drills, communications procedures, and coordination with supporting arms. Engineers conducted training on equipment operation and maintenance. These activities were scheduled to avoid interference with ongoing construction and patrol duties. Weather conditions remained variable. Rain continued to affect ground conditions and work schedules. Commanders adjusted priorities accordingly. Protective measures for personnel and equipment were emphasized. Maintenance teams addressed corrosion and were caused by humidity and salt exposure. Inspections by command staff continued. These inspections assessed defensive readiness, construction progress, sanitation, and discipline. Findings were recorded and corrective actions implemented as directed. Reports of inspections were forwarded through command channels. Throughout this period, documentation remained a constant requirement. Units maintained logs detailing daily activities, patrol results, construction output, and logistical status. Medical and intelligence sections compiled regular reports. These records reflected conditions and actions as they occurred, without reference to future operations. By this stage of occupation, Butaritari functioned as an established forward base under continuous security. Defensive systems were in place, infrastructure development continued, and daily operations followed structured routines. Coordination with naval and air elements remained active. Similar conditions were reported across other secured islands in the Gilbert Archipelago, each garrison maintaining its assigned responsibilities within the broader operational framework. In the final days of November 1943, operations on Butaritari continued under standing occupation and security directives. The island remained under full control of assigned forces, with command elements focused on maintaining order, readiness, and the steady completion of ongoing tasks. Daily operational rhythms reflected the established balance between security duties, construction activities, logistical support, and administrative requirements. Infantry units maintained continuous sector coverage. Defensive positions were further refined through incremental improvements. Earthworks were reinforced, overhead cover was added where materials permitted, and firing positions were adjusted to reflect refined fire plans. Units conducted routine inspections of weapons, ammunition, and defensive works. Sector commanders ensured that personnel remained familiar with alert procedures and assigned responsibilities. Patrol activity remained consistent. Daytime patrols focused on shoreline observation, verification of cleared areas, and inspection of defensive obstacles. Night patrols emphasized detection of movement and maintenance of contact between adjacent sectors. Reports from patrols continued to indicate an absence of organized enemy activity. All patrol findings were logged and forwarded through command channels. Engineering units continued infrastructure development. Road networks were extended to support increased vehicle movement. Surfacing improvements reduced the impact of rainfall on mobility. Construction of storage facilities progressed, with additional revetments and shelters erected for supplies and equipment. Engineers coordinated closely with logistics personnel to align construction priorities with supply requirements. Airfield development advanced within existing constraints. Grading operations expanded the usable surface area. Compaction and leveling continued as materials and equipment allowed. Temporary service areas were improved to support anticipated air operations. Engineers documented progress and submitted updated status reports to higher headquarters. Logistical operations maintained steady throughput. Landing craft continued scheduled supply runs from anchored vessels. Beach operations remained orderly, with unloading teams following established priorities. Storage areas were reorganized to improve accessibility and accountability. Fuel distribution procedures were enforced under supervision. Maintenance sections continued repair and servicing of vehicles and equipment. Medical services addressed ongoing health requirements. Routine treatment and preventive care continued. Medical officers monitored trends in illness and injury, reporting findings through medical channels. Sanitation measures remained enforced. Medical supplies were inventoried and replenished as shipments arrived. Coordination with naval medical facilities remained in effect for evacuation when required. Signal units sustained communications reliability. Redundant systems ensured continuity in the event of equipment failure. Message handling followed established protocols. Signal personnel conducted regular maintenance and training. Communications traffic reflected routine operational coordination, logistical reporting, and intelligence dissemination. Intelligence activity focused on monitoring the surrounding area. Reconnaissance reports from air and naval units were reviewed and integrated. No significant changes in enemy disposition were reported. Intelligence summaries reflected stable conditions and were distributed as required. Maps and overlays were updated to reflect completed construction and defensive arrangements. Naval forces supporting Butaritari continued patrol operations. Anti-submarine measures remained in effect. Ships rotated through anchorage areas according to schedule. Naval liaison officers maintained contact with Island Command. Gunfire support plans remained current, with target lists maintained and updated as necessary. Air operations in the vicinity remained routine. Patrol flights continued to cover assigned sectors. Weather reconnaissance informed flight planning. Liaison flights supported coordination between island command and higher headquarters. Air defense units maintained readiness, conducting inspections and drills. Parallel garrisons across the Gilbert Islands reported similar operational conditions. Construction, security, and logistical buildup continued across secured islands. Commanders exchanged reports through established channels. Resource allocation remained coordinated to support multiple island garrisons simultaneously. Administrative functions on Butaritari matured as the garrison stabilized. Personnel records were maintained. Unit strength reports were updated. Supply and maintenance accounting continued according to regulations. Limited recreational and welfare activities were organized within operational limits. Chaplain services were conducted as schedules permitted. Training activities continued on a scheduled basis. Units conducted refresher training on defensive procedures, communications, and coordination. Engineers trained personnel on equipment use and safety. Medical personnel conducted instruction on preventive measures. Training was integrated into daily routines without disrupting operational requirements. Weather conditions remained a factor in daily planning. Rainfall and humidity continued to affect ground conditions and equipment. Protective measures for supplies and electronics were maintained. Commanders adjusted work schedules to account for environmental conditions. Inspections by command staff remained routine. These inspections covered defensive readiness, discipline, sanitation, equipment condition, and progress of construction projects. Findings were recorded and corrective actions implemented as directed. Reports of inspections were forwarded through established reporting channels. Throughout this period, documentation requirements continued to be met. Units maintained daily logs and reports. Engineering sections recorded progress and material usage. Medical sections compiled statistics. Intelligence sections maintained summaries. These records reflected ongoing activities and conditions as they occurred. By the close of November 1943, Butaritari functioned as a fully secured and organized garrison area. Defensive systems were established and maintained. Infrastructure development continued according to directives. Routine operations proceeded under standing orders. Coordination with naval and air elements remained continuous. Parallel operations across the Gilbert Islands reflected similar conditions, with each island garrison maintaining security, supporting construction, and sustaining operations within the framework of assigned responsibilities.